Okay, we're back, and I think this should be the final video. It's been a bit of a slog, and so thank you for bearing with me. We're in Hardball Tactics in Section 5, and we're going to start with the poison pill and the bogey, and I think the next one is called the Briar patch, so giving you some interesting terminology, at least to throw at these people. And on the rare occasions you'll see these ones used. These are basically situations where you have multi-interests and you're trying to disguise which interest is most important, so that you get people thinking, oh, that's the interest, and then finally when you disclose what your true interest is to deal with to kind of claim maximum value. This poison or bogey or both situations where you're really not interested in the interest. And in the poison pill situation, you see it's something they really don't want, so you're going to push it. Oh yes, this is an important interest for me. And bogey is something where they want it and you don't, but you're going to try to convince them that this is an important interest and then give it up for something, trading it. And the Briar patch is the opposite. It's where you do want something, but you're going to try and disguise what you really don't want it. So, I don't think there's a lot to be said. There's nothing wrong with having priority and interest. It's usually the real issue is the statements you make that accompany these, and so it's really a misrepresentation issue usually. And it's the sort of thing that I guess by Alberta rules you wouldn't be allowed to do. I think in terms of dealing with them, the real point is to catch them, and it's the same issue all the time, or the same idea all the time. If you see somebody across the table doing a kind of a 180, I mean, you should start thinking and recognize that, oh, they've been been feeding me something for the last little while, and react properly. Recognize that that they shouldn't gain any leverage advantage out of it. So not an awful lot there, but I thought I'd throw them out. A chicken is basically an abuse of power situation. You have to have power, advantage over somebody, and what you're going to do is you're going to really try to run it as far as you can. We see it in the industrial relations world the most, where somebody's going to move a business, a company's threatening to move a business out, and they're trying to get concessions, and they go too far, and it's a very difficult situation to deal with. I'll tell you what the unions do is they basically just hang in there. They make their own calculations and they stick by them. But I haven't seen it very often, if ever, actually, in my involvement in negotiations or mediations. Fading horizon is the idea that you're going to go backwards in the direction that you've been making your offers on. So that in the end, instead of going down towards a kind of an objective, you're sending a signal that actually you're going to go backwards in times. And clearly it's a bit of, if you're doing it, it's a bit of an abusive process. And as a mediator, I try to prevent it, obviously. Sometimes it occurs out of frustration, sort of, I'm going to shoot this one across the bow. I have seen circumstances where people on the other side have actually miscalculated. After thinking the whole thing through, the party says enough's enough, we're going back in the opposite direction, and it turns out to have been very bad circumstance for the party who was seeing the fading horizon. I still sort of see it as somebody trying to blow one across the bow of the other side and maybe intimidate them a little bit. Anyway, it's something that, when I see it happening, I'm indicating that something they shouldn't do. It's a bit of a bad faith thing, not really maybe, but in any event it's there, and the label for you is, oh, that's a fading horizon, and that'll glaze their eyes over nothing else. Who is this guy? I don't know what you can do about it. As I said, it depends upon all the circumstances. Time pressures, there's nothing wrong, obviously, with putting ends. I mean, some people will just go on and on and on, and you've got to shut it down. The real problem is doing these things after you've divulged new information, or scheduling. I think scheduling to gain advantage is really bad faith and improper, and a sharp practice, and shouldn't be done. I guess the big point, as I've tried to make all along, when you're put into these situations, you're at a disadvantage, and I think more importantly, mentally, because it's so important, that the attitude, the mindset is so important in negotiating is that they're trying to force you to kind of go ahead and demonstrate that you want the job, want the deal, and more than they do. And leverage is all about who really wants the deal most at that time in negotiations. I'm saying you shouldn't tip your hand unless you have to. You should think. Anyway, you should always examine the situation. Are they trying to force me to show my hand that I need the deal more than they do? And if that's the net result, you should probably try to counter that strategy they're working against you. Surface bargaining, this is, you see this, the whole thing, bad faith surface bargaining, comes from the industrial relations world, where there's an obligation on the parties, actually in industrial legislation, to industrial relations legislation, to bargain in good faith, to attempt to arrive at a deal, at a settlement. And where we see it is unions that are newly certified, the employer doesn't want anything to do with them, and they're going to try to fulfill this duty to bargain, but really not arrive at a conclusion, with the hopes that the union will be decertified. Where we see it kind of in negotiations on a day-to-day basis is where there's a bunch of steps in the process, or where one side has deep pockets and they have an advantage, and they're basically trying to wear the other side down. And they go into the process and they really have no intention of reaching a deal. One of the things I think in terms of strategy that you should always do is this really the end of the road? Because if it's not really the end of the road, as I said, things like final offers, resistance points, the whole thing. They may be playing for the next step, and you should look at sort of what are the costs of going to the next step. It's one of the things you should be thinking about, because if there are costs going to the next step, then the chances are better for you to get a settlement at this step. If not, if you're going to go into the next step, and it really doesn't cost them anything, they're all set to go, it's just time, and they're going to go through all these antics. At this step, you should recognize that that's where it is, and you may not be able to get the deal today. So the thing is, like, have control over your client in terms of what their expectations are of being able to reach a settlement, because a lot of clients really want to get it done, and this may not be the day, this may not be the time, and you've got to tell them that. I don't really think there's anything to say about it. My own view is when you go into a settlement process, you should be trying to get it done 100% that day, and if you're not, it is bad faith. It's an abusive process. But we can't prevent people from doing that. Okay, so now we're in a kind of the second set of hardball tactics. We're talking about trying to throw people off in their decision-making processes, and we've got intimidation, diminishment, and criticism. Well, this is more a comment on irritators, but I don't see much overt intimidation. It's kind of gone by, I think, now. Maybe it's the people who retain me as a mediator. I'm not an intimidator. I can be kind of a tough guy if I have to be, but I find it really doesn't work very well, to tell you the truth, and so I don't go in that process. And certainly as a mediator, I try to deal with problems as I see them coming up, so that when I make the classic statement of a mediator is that's not helpful, and I get engaged. And necessary, I will break it up and bring the lawyers in and say, okay, guys, what's going on here? We really, this is not going to get it done, and we're just blowing up the process, so come on, let's go. But what can I say? The reaction to anything like this, the reaction, how you counter something like this, these types of emotional inducing kind of steps, is A, not to react, to respond, to sort of recognize what's going on, and basically these are pure influencing tactics, and to respond in accordance with your strategy. I think it helps to see negotiation sometimes as a game, and sort of see it sort of looking down on it the way a mediator does to a certain extent. Oh yeah, they're doing that, and oh, they're trying to get that one on me, are they? Well, and smile inwardly and deal with it. But so that's you shouldn't be thrown off stride. One of the problems is people sometimes don't like to confront, and they can be intimidated. That's the clients. It's your job as lawyers to make sure that doesn't happen. And if you're not there, if you can't confront that sort of thing as a lawyer, as a litigation lawyer at least, you probably shouldn't be litigating, because we do have to confront some oddball people and lawyers in the process of going through. a diminishment. This one I do see quite a bit of, and it's very subtle. And in the, you're going to see in the simulated opening that I do, I am diminishing. I am never seen in all my 25 years. I am pulling this kind of stunt, and because I'm trying to show you some of the things that can be done. And these are the two classics against the young lawyer or against the female lawyer, sort of trying to characterize, use stereotypes a little bit, sort of, this is my process, what are you doing here, da 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 da. And my own view is you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. I think that lawyers that do that are really abusing their position once again. These things react. Don't react, I mean, how do you respond? Sometimes the best response is just to ignore the whole thing. Certainly, you mustn't tip your hand to be shown that the folks are getting at you, and use humor, irony. I think sort of never seen that in my 25 years. You know, the quip back is, well, you know, George, that doesn't surprise me because I'm not sure you've seen a lot of things. And you can put it back there. It's a bit of a sharp return. Don't get so upset. Thanks for the advice. Clearly irony, and move on. But don't react. Don't bite at the lure. You know, it's put in front of you. Just let it go by to a certain extent, minimizing it, and move on. You can use a mediator's term. That's not really very helpful. Let's stick to brass tacks here and all that. But I think humor and irony are always the best. But don't show that it's got to you, and don't spend any more than a nanosecond on it, really. Criticisms. This is something you have to deal with, and I guess maybe I'm speaking more to you as a lawyer. When you're kind of mad at the other side, the lawyers get mad at each other, and away they go, and they just won't let go. It's kind of like an old married couple. My spouse isn't listening, but sometimes, you know, you just don't want to let go of something, and it's really not helpful. Once again, mediators should prevent this, but you know, against some senior lawyers, when they really decide that they're going to have a go at each other, it's hard to do. I'm saying don't do it. I'm saying good negotiators don't use irritators. They don't let it get under their skin. They basically, you know, some guys have done this thing to me, such as life. I'm going to mention it once, but I'm not going to hammer away at it. And I've seen very senior lawyers, and often it is senior lawyers who are kind of mad at each other, and they know that tricks have been trying to be pulled on with scheduling and everything else, and they're mad as hell. You got to just let it drift by. So maybe that's a tip. But certainly for the younger lawyers, don't get into irritator exchanges. It's really not worth it. It doesn't take you anywhere. And false trust and status. So you know, I think that basically, bad cop, good cop. That what I'm really talking about is a change that you see in the lawyer and how they're acting. They've sort of gone from sort of being tough to being nice. Maybe it means that they think they got done as well as they can, and they want to close the deal by being sweet. Anyway, just look for those changes. Using status and authority, this is something that I do see from time to time. People abusing kind of old patterns that they've developed where the other side is submissive or overly respectful, the boss or the senior, I don't know, politician or member of the church. And as lawyers, you should recognize that situation. You're going into a position where you're maybe going to, your client maybe want to be sort of overly submissive, and you should recognize that and make sure they don't. So I'm just saying, I'm pointing that out to you, false trust and status, and sometimes they play it. The boss will play it, sort of saying, you know, and trying to lord it over the employee the way they always have sort of through their years. And it's a reflection maybe on the employer, no doubt. But you as lawyers have to protect that, against that. And taking into confidence, all I'm saying is when another lawyer comes to you and says, I need help with my client, hey, that's not what we do. We don't ask for help with our client. You can sometimes ask the mediator for help, but certainly you shouldn't be disclosing to the other side that you have problems with your client. I mean, it's a breach of the solicitor-client relationship, and so I think you can ignore that. And the other thing I see sometimes is playing on guilt. They really can't afford this, etc., etc. Maybe they can afford this, but that's a client-to-client thing, not for a lawyer to make the pitch to you or your party. So I'm just saying it's not really the rules we play by. And if the parties want to work something out, they can, but it's not something that we lawyers tend to get involved in. So I think that ending point here, the collaborative bargainer. these are the lists. It's like same sort of lists for advocates when you come right down to it. Being civil and ask more questions than you need to is probably one of the keys, and don't stop being prudent and seeking advantage. It's there, and the good bargainers, they don't need any of these tricks. I've sort of got that point across. What they do is they're very opportunistic. They're rational in their approach. They're intuitive, both at the same time. They're looking for opportunities, and they do go by systems, and they do know this stuff backwards and forwards. Believe me, all the things I've talked about today. But in the end, the gamesmanship, they don't really use it. They certainly don't lie, and they just kind of outthink you, outforce you. They've got a certain what's the word? I don't know. Their commitment to getting it, and it's a lot of mind game, as I said, and it's a lot of looking for opportunities, seeing them arrive, and taking advantage of them. But I think you should be the collaborative partner. It's the only way to go. Closing summary. I don't think I really got much to say that I haven't already said. I've tried to provide some insights and try to help you in the knowledge side. You're not going to, this is not this course and even the next module is not going to make you an experienced good bargainer, but I do hope that it gives you the foundation, and certainly on the defensive side, it'll prevent some of the shenanigans from happening that I see from time to time occurring in mediations. But generally, I don't want to be hard on people. I think the people that appear in front of me or that use me are good. They're good professionals. They're there trying to do the best for their clients, but they're not abusing the process. It's pretty rare, really. Maybe the ethical issues, I've been pushing that a little bit, and as I said, inspire you to go forward. I should probably, well, actually, some of the reference materials, I do want to talk to you about that a little bit. There are some very good books out there. This one is by Lewicki, and on the essentials of negotiation. By Lewicki, there's a team actually, including Professor Saunders from Queen's. Anyway, it's kind of I think it's the best fundamental book. It's got it all really, and they have a bigger version, and I highly recommend that being part of your library. I've already mentioned Richard Schell, Bargaining for Advantage. He's recognized as one of the real pros, and it's a good little book, and it's got most of what I've told you in it. As we go forward, one of the books, took this on a camping trip, didn't do too well. Difficult Conversations by a group at Harvard. It sort of gets into the inner workings of how the mistakes we make and how we see intention and our own contribution and identity and these inner problems, the intangibles. I think it's a good book to deal with the intangibles. Recent book, Negotiation Genius, very useful for where I'm going, influencing. It's got, I steal from it shamelessly, I'm sorry to say, and it's got a lot of really good scenarios and descriptions of kind of how you influence and how the irrational side. And same with How We Decide. This is a very recent book. This is just general consumption, but it's got background onto how our brain works, the intuition versus rational, the cortex, the frontal lobe, and everything else, and what they're finding out from research. And it's a very interesting book, and it confirms a lot of the things on the intuitive side and gives you quite a bit of insights into life. This is a good book, just generally I recommend it. So that would be it. Maybe I should make a few comments though on my simulation if you do get to look at it for the younger lawyers. Just a little bit of background. What you're going to see is me as the defense counsel, just looking at me. Basically I have my adjuster on my left, and there's the mediator on the right, and I'm looking at the plaintiff and her lawyer. I think his name is Michael. That's all completely fictitious. It is though taken from aspects from different mediations, but one that I really did see, which struck me, and involving a very senior counsel from Toronto who knows the business very well. That's all he ever does is personal injury work against a relatively junior lawyer in an important case. And what struck me about it, I guess there's a bunch of things. Well, first of all, was that the younger lawyer was kind of really making his pitch, pouring his heart out to the adjuster, and it's kind of talking to the wall, to a certain extent. And at the same time, he allowed the senior counsel to really have a go at his client. I'm not saying you shouldn't have those sort of exchanges, but you have to do it on a level playing field, and that really wasn't a level playing field. So that's one of the things you have to look at, just generally. One of the observations I made looking at the whole thing as an observer was that the younger lawyer was just transfixed on the senior lawyer. Maybe he was trying to get tips or whatever it was, but he wasn't looking at his client at all. And the client was clearly showing agitation. She was being bothered by the whole process, and she was looking at him. And I guess I'm just trying to say is make sure you're focused. You're there to represent your client. That's what you got to look at. So this is what I observed in that situation. What else can I say? I was using a collaborative style. This is a simulation. I crossed the line a couple of times, very subtly, very subtly. Certainly kind of threatening kind of we may not be able to get this done because of costs. This is not a sort of situation where costs would ever really have an impact, or that we wouldn't make better offers in the future. Like that's, I mean, that's something the lawyer would know is not in fact the case. But I was trying to convince the first of all I tried to separate her from her lawyer, a bit of diminishment all my years, and you'll sort of see. And I'm trying to convince her that this is today or never. It's only going to get worse, and it may be something that's going to disappear, sort of the scarcity thing. As well, I was working very hard on expectations, reality. You'll see that's where you go to, is that you got to convince people that what they are thinking they're going to get is they're not going to get, so give it up. And what can I say? I used quite a bit of negotiation speak in there, where it probably really wasn't applicable in all the circumstances. So some tips there just for you as you look at it, as one style that works for me, I suppose. Everybody's style is different, but there's a bunch of things in there that we've seen in the course to a certain extent, and maybe some influencing tips. Okay, so I think that's it, folks. See you in the next module if you're there, and appreciate you hanging in there if you've been through the whole thing. But it's hard to listen to somebody who just talking head here, so I do appreciate that, and I hope you've learned something from it. Thank you very much.